Now, once the counting of the Electoral College resumed, it played out much differently than expected. Along with Arizona, there was also debate over rejecting Pennsylvania's results. An anticipated objection to Georgia's electoral votes was never entertained because of a change of heart, specifically on the part of outgoing Senator Kelly Loeffler. Let's watch that moment play out.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Georgia rise?
Mr. President, myself, members of the Georgia delegation, and some 74 of my Republican colleagues and I object to the electoral votes from the state of Georgia on the grounds that the election conducted on November 3rd was faulty and fraudulent due to unilateral actions by the Secretary of State to unlawfully change the state's election process without approval from the General Assembly, and thereby setting the stage for an unprecedented amount of fraud and irregularities, and I have signed the objection myself.
Sections 15 and 17 of Title III of the United States Code require that any objection be presented in writing and signed by a member of the House of Representatives and a senator. Is the objection in writing and signed by a member and a senator?
Mr. President, prior to the actions and events of today, we did, but following the events of today, it appears that some senators have withdrawn their objection.